CBC senior reporter Tara Carmen led this investigation, and she joins us now. Tara, you visited the valley in October and saw the divide between protected forest and logging area firsthand. What is collocation?
Well, essentially, Dan, it's satisfying two forestry regulations with the same patch of trees. So here's the thing. When an area is logged, companies have to leave a small amount of trees standing for wildlife. So that makes sense if you picture a vole, for example, running across a clear cut being chased by a hawk. So these wildlife retention trees give it a place to hide. What collocation means is those trees that they have to save being placed in an area that's already protected, such as wildlife habitat. Will O'Connell discovered this when he found a piece of orange tape indicating a falling boundary, the edge of an area authorized to be cut about 50 meters into the protected area.
The falling company has been ordered by the government to leave an island of old-growth trees when they log a whole cut block so that there will still be a place for migratory birds and other animals to go. And because they've been ordered to leave this island, they've said, well, let's pretend that we're going to go log the wildlife habitat, and then we can say, oh, look, that's our island. So right now we're standing in the wildlife habitat, and this whole island of forest around us represents an island of old-growth trees that should have been protected up in the cut block behind us, but instead has been logged.
Tara, this sounds like a loophole. So is collocation legal?
Not only is it legal, but it's actually encouraged by the government as a way to maximize timber harvests. But as a few experts pointed out, we're supposed to have moved beyond the era when this was our primary goal. So in 2020, a landmark report from BC's Old Growth Strategic Review said we are at a crisis point in this province for biodiversity, and we need a new approach that puts ecological health front and center. And old growth forests are key to this because they've been growing for centuries. It's wet on the coast, so they've never burned. And this means that they're home to a huge variety of plants and animals. Independent ecologist Karen Price, who was part of the BC government's advisory panel on old growth, called collocation double counting and a relic of a bygone era. She said the government could prove it's truly committed to a new direction by ending these kinds of practices.
They can say, okay, we are no longer going to co-locate because we recognize that co-locating is damaging to ecosystems. It's damaging to the functions that we want these ecosystems to perform. So now that we know all that, we want to see evidence on the ground that the government is following through with the idea to shift the paradigm.
Karen also pointed out that these are some of the biggest carbon stores in the country because they've been storing it for centuries. So if they're cut, not only do they release a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, but the newly clear-cut ground loses its ability to hold water and dries out, which means floods and fires, all the hallmarks of climate change that BC is becoming famous for, even more likely. And it affects wildlife too. And that is simply becomes unprotected in a patchwork of forest in a barren landscape of cuts.
Tara, what does the company responsible for the logging have to say about this?
So the company doing the login is called Sawakin, and that company is 2/3 owned by Western Forest Products, which has held the license to log in this area since 2006, and 1/3 owned by the Huu-ay Nation, whose traditional territory it is. I spoke with the Sawakin board chair Shauna McConnell, who's also vice president of Indigenous Partnerships for Western Forest Products. She emphasized that 3/4 of the old growth forest in this area is protected and that the company doesn't cut the biggest and tallest trees. I also spoke with Elder M. Chaik, who was a former chief counselor of the Huu-ay. He said his people watched for decades as companies profited from selling the timber and the fish from their land, and they wanted to say at the management table in how that process worked so their values could inform it. He said forestry is central to the economy of his community, and he had a clear message for those who question his people's right to manage their own land.
Respect our decision. Honor and respect it with the utmost sincerity, that you're not interfering, that you're not trying to control my life. You're not trying to control how I should live. I've had that for 150 years. I don't need it anymore.
The Ministry of Forests wouldn't give us an interview. They told me they'd prefer to respond to written questions. They said co-location wasn't an issue and that the same patch of forest can serve more than one purpose, and that they're working with communities, industry, and scientists to come up with long-term land use plans. But while they do that, Dan, there is likely to be more old-growth logging in the Klanawa Valley.
CBC reporter, senior reporter Tara Carman, thanks very much.